humanity reached its greatest achievement. We placed our sharpest $10 billion eye into space. It was a perfect machine. But the very first thing this machine found, Hycean, was a paradox that shattered the most fundamental laws of physics. When Webb analyzed the data from K2-18b, the scientific world was left stunned. Before us stood a planet 8 times heavier than our own. In this planet's atmosphere, there was evidence of life, with 99.7% certainty. But this was a contradiction, because this planet's orbit, according to the laws of thermodynamics, should have instantly incinerated everything. The even greater paradox was that life had emerged in precisely these deadly conditions. If you want to witness this moment where physics went bankrupt, like the video, because the entire model of the universe you know is about to be shaken to its core. We are beginning. For years, we believed we were completely alone in this vast universe. We thought that outside our solar system, Earth was the only place with that delicate and perfect balance to host life. Among billions of galaxies, we assumed only our planet was breathing. However, that colossal observatory, which took 2 decades and $10 billion to build, fixed its dark eyes on the depths of space, and the James Webb Space Telescope became active, operating at a temperature of -233 degrees Celsius, because it began to scan the unseen face of the universe with infrared light. And yet, everything we knew suddenly changed. Now we know that the traces of life are hiding much closer than we ever thought. For first, we must clarify the concept of a habitable planet. It's not enough for a planet to simply exist to harbor life. It must be at that perfect distance, inside the habitable zone, where it can maintain liquid water on its surface. We can compare this to sitting around a campfire on a freezing winter night. If you get too close to the fire, you'll burn from the heat. If you move too far away, you'll instantly freeze. You must find the exact right distance. The exoplanet K2-18b stands at precisely this safe point. But this planet does not orbit an ordinary yellow dwarf like our Sun. Its star is an extremely dim red dwarf named K2-18. Red dwarfs are much smaller and cooler stars than our Sun. Their mass is only 1/4 of our stars. Therefore, for the planets around them to warm up, they must orbit much closer to the star. So, why is this planetary model so important? Because red dwarfs do not die quickly like the Sun. Our yellow dwarf currently has about 4 billion years of life left, and it is rapidly consuming its fuel. However, red dwarfs can continue to shine with the same stability for 45 billion to 70 billion years. This number represents a massive window of time. It offers an incredible opportunity for life on these planets to sprout, to evolve, and to become much more complex. Therefore, the case of K2-18b is not just about being in the right place. It is also warming itself in front of one of the universe's longest-lived and most stable heat sources. But the true fascination of this distant world lies in its strange and rule-breaking structure. K2-18b DE is located exactly 124 light-years away from Earth. If we convert this distance to kilometers, we get the terrifying figure of 1.2 quadrillion kilometers. Reaching it may seem impossible for now, because it is a giant sub-Neptune type planet, nothing like Earth. Its radius covers an area 2.5 times wider than our planet. Its mass is exactly 8 times the weight of our world. So, If you could set foot there, the planet's gravity would pin you to the ground with a force 8 times stronger. It completes one full orbit around its star in just 33 days. Because the planet's equilibrium temperature was measured at around -2 degrees Celsius. This figure might sound freezing to you at first. However, this measurement is only a theoretical surface radiation balance. When the thick atmosphere of this giant planet comes into play, things change completely. Because K2-18b is classified as a Hycean world. What does this mean? It means that beneath a massive gas layer of 100% hydrogen lies a vast spherical ocean of liquid water. Do not expect rocky landmasses or giant continents reaching the horizon. There are only dark waters and massive waves. This situation profoundly shakes our current astrobiological theories. Because, until yesterday, we were searching for life only on Earth-sized, shallow, and rocky planets. Now we understand that these massive gas and water worlds, where the atmosphere constitutes 6.5% of the mass, can be just as alive as our own home. So, how can we possibly know there is life on a giant water ball quadrillions of kilometers away? It is right here that James Webb's unique infrared spectrometers come into play. As the planet passes in front of its own star, the light from the star filters through this thick hydrogen atmosphere and reaches Earth. Different gases in the atmosphere absorb different wavelengths of light. Webb reads this absorbed light, revealing the atmosphere's chemical barcode with extraordinary clarity. The analyses revealed the presence of 1% methane and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This alone was very exciting for astrophysicists. Because these carbon molecules, combined with the lack of ammonia in the atmosphere, definitively showed that this giant ocean was indeed on the planet's surface. But this was not what truly shocked scientists. What kept them up at night? The data sent by Webb carried traces of a very special and complex molecule, never before found on any planet. The name of this molecule, and yet, the name of this molecule was dimethyl sulfide, or more simply, DMS. Let's simplify this vital concept in your mind. On Earth, there is only one mechanism that can naturally produce this gas outside of a laboratory setting, and that is life itself. The phytoplankton and microscopic creatures in our oceans constantly release this gas into the atmosphere. The main source of that fresh ocean and seaweed smell that fills your nose when you go to the seaside is this exact DMS molecule. Finding traces of this gas in the atmosphere of K2-18b Hycean is like finding a single green leaf in a vast cosmic desert. Why is this discovery so critical? Because we know of no known inorganic, geological, or volcanic process outside of Earth that could produce DMS in such a high concentration. In astrobiology, we call this a biosignature, and now we hold that signature in our hands. So, let's lean back and look at this incredible and terrifying picture. We have a red star that will live perfectly for 45 billion years. Around it, there is a giant water world, 8 times heavier than Earth, orbiting in just 33 days. And in the winds blowing over this massive ocean, drifts that familiar ocean scent that can only be produced by living organisms. Moreover, the James Webb Space Telescope collected this data with such unique and sensitive technology that it reduced the margin of error to just 0.3%. But this means, with an irrefutable rate of 99.7%, that something there is breathing. something is reproducing and releasing chemical gases into that vast dark ocean. This is a staggering possibility that demolishes our entire known model of the universe. So, how were these microscopic detections from quadrillions of kilometers away actually possible? What exactly is hidden in those dark depths, beneath that massive hydrogen atmosphere and crushing waves? Because solving the secrets hidden in its depths is not as simple as looking at the sky with an ordinary camera. Therefore, we must understand exactly how we read that faint beam of light coming from billions of kilometers away. For years, we looked at these distant worlds as if we were blind. But, thanks to James Webb, we can now literally see the chemical reality that lies beneath those giant waves. The way astronomers find and analyze these planets is actually like a giant shadow theater. Imagine a small fly passing in front of a giant flashlight in a dark room. The fly blocks some of the light, fog tints, and the lamp's brightness momentarily dims. The system works exactly the same way in space. We call this the transit method. As K2-18b passes in front of its own red star, it blocks a tiny fraction of that red light. But our telescopes are sensitive enough to catch even this tiny dimming, because that massive light from the star filters through the planet's atmosphere before reaching us. K2-18b repeats this giant shadow play every 33-day orbit around its star. The starlight travels an unbelievable distance, filtering through the planet's atmosphere. These photons journey through space for exactly 124 light-years, or 1.2 quadrillion kilometers. When Webb's gold-plated mirrors collect this light, they instantly record this change, even if the dimming is only 0.3%. Even if the atmosphere's thickness is only 6.5% of the planet's total mass. This very thin layer flawlessly copies the giant planet's entire chemical identity onto that light, like a barcode. Why does this light analysis change everything? Because before, we could only calculate the planet's size and orbit. We estimated the planet's rough size by looking at the duration of the light's dimming. But now, thanks to the spectrometer, we can see at which wavelength the light is absorbed with millimeter precision. Therefore, we can know for sure whether there is liquid water or toxic ammonia under that dark gas layer. The entire history of astronomy was fumbling in the dark. Webb Muscats, with this technology, suddenly turned on the universe's lights. But what exactly are planets like K2-18b, which we call sub-Neptunes or super-Earths, and why are they so strange? If you look at your own solar system, you see a very clear distinction. There are either small, dusky, hard, rocky planets like Earth and Mars, or there are giant gas balls like Jupiter and Uranus. There is absolutely nothing in between. Imagine walking into a clothing store and seeing only small and extra large sizes on the shelves. Medium or large sizes were never produced. This strange size gap in space is what we call the Fulton gap. However, K2-18b lies right at the center of this unexplained cosmic void. Why these medium-sized planets, with a radius between 2 and 6 times that of Earth, are not found in our system is a huge mystery. When the mass reaches 8 times that of Earth, the planet's gravity reaches incredible proportions. This planet has one of the strangest sizes on the list of 5,000 confirmed exoplanets. This is vital for understanding planets, because very small planets cannot hold their atmospheres and launch them into space. if very large planets. On the other hand, collapse under their own immense gas pressure and do not allow for liquid water. But these medium-sized planets can create that perfect balance to keep massive oceans liquid on their surfaces. That's why, if we are looking for life in other corners of the universe, the first place we will look will be these strange and lonely giants in the Fulton Gap. We saw how Webb separates light photons with this immense sensitivity. We understood the nature of the Fulton Gap planets, the missing sizes that never existed in our solar system, and we grasped the chaotic structure of that hellish yet fertile water world, where atmosphere and ocean mix. The infrared spectrometers tore through the curtain of billions of kilometers of dark universe and presented us with these incredible mechanical details. But we are no longer just talking about theories, ocean boundaries, or general atmospheric predictions, because the audience and the scientific community are waiting for the answer to the biggest question. What living and definitive evidence did James Webb send us from this vast emptiness? What is hidden inside the shocking data that gave rise to that famous 99.7% probability of life? How did the giant storms blowing from the planet's dark side reveal phytoplankton-like formations in that liquid soup? And what were the real discoveries that left astrophysicists frozen in front of their screens? Because, just at that moment, as scientists were trying to digest the life signals coming from the dark waters of K2-18, the real shock came from the much deeper reaches of the universe. Because James Webb was not just looking at exoplanets, and just at that moment, as scientists were trying to digest the life signals coming from the dark waters of K2-18, the real shock came from the much deeper reaches of the universe, because James Webb was not just looking at exoplanets. It was designed to look at time itself, into the darkest past of the universe. The telescope turned its 18 gold-plated mirrors to the darkest corners of space. When the temperature dropped to negative 233 degrees Celsius, the systems began to operate at full capacity. And in that moment, data began to flow that would throw everything we knew into the trash. There shouldn't have been smoke in the remotest corner of space. But there was, exactly 12 billion light-years away from Earth. It was as if a giant fire had broken out in a dark galaxy. The light had traveled for 12 billion years through the darkness of space to reach us. This signal, captured by Webb's infrared sensors, instantly shook humanity's model of the universe. Because, it had pushed the record back by 1 billion years, even though we were looking at just 1.5 billion years after the Big Bang. The telescope's spectrometers detected the chemical signature of those complex organic molecules found in soot and smoke on Earth with extraordinary clarity. Finding these heavy carbon-based molecules in such an ancient and wild era of space was a complete cosmological disaster. Because according to the laws of physics and our models, the universe was too young then. There should have been only simple hydrogen and helium gases. There certainly had not been enough time for stars to die and scatter these heavy elements into space through supernova explosions. Therefore, the existence of those smoke molecules in that dark galaxy seemed completely impossible. Theories had never predicted this. The scientific world was left stunned by this discovery. Even if there was a malfunction in one of the instruments, that impossible smoke was still there. It was as if someone had lit a fire at the dawn of time. But before scientists could recover from the shock of this smoke, the telescope captured a brand new nightmare. In space, there shouldn't be giant clouds of burning sand instead of snow or water. However, Webb found exactly that. The object named VEHS1256b or more destroyed all our meteorological rules. This massive structure was 20 times larger than our solar system's giant Jupiter. It was orbiting two different red dwarfs, and it was so far away that it took exactly 10,000 Earth years to complete a single orbit. This was a massive brown dwarf that had never reached the mass required to trigger nuclear fusion. It glowed with a purple light in the dark due to the scorching heat radiating from it. But the truly impossible part was the nature of the storms raging in this sky, because the clouds of this world were not made of water vapor, but of microscopic quartz and silicate particles. These hot sand grains were only 1 micrometer in size. Giant storms the size of Earth were hurling trillions of tons of hot sand at speeds of hundreds of kilometers per hour. Sand rising and floating like a gas in an atmosphere was something that absolutely should not happen according to the laws of gravity and thermodynamics. However, Webb's infrared eyes recorded the signature of these sandstorms, millisecond by millisecond. And now comes the real shock, that dark zero point where physics completely failed. There absolutely should not have been massive and old galaxies in the depths of the baby universe. But Mathieu's 6 supergiant galaxies were looking at us from the bottom of the darkness. When Webb focused on the moments right after the Big Bang, it saw the terrifying scene that blew astronomers' minds. These galaxies had barely formed just 500 to 700 million years after the Big Bang. But according to the cosmic calendar, the universe was just a baby in its cradle. However, these 6 structures had reached incredible sizes. The mass inside each of them was the same size as our massive Milky Way galaxy, 100,000 light-years wide. Moreover, the insides of these galaxies were rusting with billions of years old. Mature, lush, red stars. For stars to appear billions of years old when the universe itself was only 700 million years old was literally a logical error. Because, all our theories of the universe say that galaxies should grow slowly. By merging from small dust clouds, it is mandatory for at least 10 billion years to pass for a galaxy the size of the Milky Way to form. Finding such massive and ancient structures in a baby universe was violating the fundamental rules of evolution. It seemed impossible. Therefore, astronomers realized in horror that they had completely miscalculated our entire history of existence. The series of impossibilities did not end here. The fastest, darkest, and most deadly shock was lying in ambush. At the center of everything, at the dawn of time, stood a cosmic monster that should not have existed. We should not have seen supermassive black holes among the faint gas clouds of the young universe. However, Webb's cameras detected a giant black hole, exactly 9 billion times more massive than our Sun. Imagine squeezing 9 billion stars into a single black dot. This monster, which swallowed even light, had appeared when the universe was only 800 million years old. It was devouring the matter around it so ferociously that it was brighter than hundreds of galaxies combined. For a black hole to reach this mind-boggling mass, it would have needed to slowly swallow stars for at least 4 billion years. But the universe was not old enough to feed this monster. And yet, the laws of physics would never have allowed a black hole to devour so much matter in such a short time. The radiation pressure should have pushed the matter out. this should not have happened. It seemed impossible. However, this giant monster, mocking all our equations, stood right in the heart of darkness, and smoking baby galaxies. Brown dwarfs scorched by hot sandstorms. Adult giant galaxies in a cosmic kindergarten. And that impossible 9 billion solar mass black hole that destroyed the mathematics of the universe. James Webb, in a very short time, dynamited the foundations of astronomy. Everything we believed was shattered, because the cosmos was screaming at us every second that we were wrong. However, according to the laws of gravity we know, all these massive structures should never have existed in that era. So, how do we explain this? What if our laws of gravity have been incomplete from the very beginning? What if the formulas we know about the formation of the universe are completely wrong? What is the real mechanism behind this massive dark mystery? And now, with trembling eyes, we look into that infinite void of space, and at the giant anomalies hidden in that void, far larger than we could ever imagine, breaking all the rules. And in that infinite void, hidden were giant anomalies, far larger than we could ever imagine, breaking all the rules. At the end of the previous chapter, we asked that terrifying question: how will we explain these giant, dark secrets that destroy all the laws of physics? The scientific world took a deep breath. It fell into silence, and it focused with extreme attention on the brand new data packets sent by the telescope from that ice-cold void of space. But the new infrared images that arrived, instead of offering us a logical explanation, continued to mercilessly tear apart the last valid laws of physics we had left, and the fabric of space, was literally being torn apart. Webb recorded the most violent and most massive collision in the universe, second by second. In this chaotic region called Pandora's cluster, 3 giant galaxy clusters, which should normally be hundreds of millions of light years apart, were colliding with each other. Thousands of billions of stars, massive black holes, and dense dark matter. These 3 colossal structures were brutally merging to create a single mega cluster. This enormous mass was so heavy and so dense that it bent the fabric of space-time like a giant cosmic magnifying glass. We call this gravitational lensing. Thanks to this natural lens of trillions of tons created by the collision, Webb saw faint galaxies from the early universe, which it could normally never see, 10 times brighter, wider, and larger. The gathering of such an incredibly large mass and its ability to bend space into such a perfect optical lens was something that absolutely should not have happened. Because for dark matter and normal matter to create such a symmetrical magnifying glass seemed almost impossible according to our physical models. Light should have traveled in a straight line through space. However, here, it was being refracted and bent at an incredible angle, creating a massive cosmic illusion. The most fundamental optical laws of the universe were literally collapsing. Astronomers could not believe their eyes when they saw more than 1,000 new stars we were unaware of, filtering through this giant gravitational lens. Because this colossal image proved the terrifying dominance of gravity over light, with a clarity never before seen in human history. But before this optical shockwave had passed, a much more violent rebellion was discovered in the dark nursery of stars. The telescope observing the Tarantula Nebula expected to see a calm, Hycean's cold gas cloud slowly condensing. However, this dark region was literally a brutal battlefield. This giant nebula, located exactly 170,000 light-years from Earth, was an incredible 1,800 light-years wide. This structure was the most violent, as K2's largest, yet, and most active star-forming region among all the neighboring galaxies of the Milky Way. When Webb's infrared cameras pierced through this thick cosmic dust curtain, it found about 30,000 young protostars previously hidden from our telescopes. These stars had not yet reached their full mass and were wildly growing. Greedy cosmic monsters, they were sucking in the cold gas around them like a giant vacuum cleaner. For tens of thousands of massive stars to be born simultaneously in such a narrow space and in such a short time was completely contrary to our theories, because, under normal conditions, star formation should be a slow, balanced, meshed and isolated process lasting millions of years. The hydrogen gas should have slowly collapsed under gravity. But here, stars were emerging at an extremely chaotic speed, like a chain nuclear explosion. The laws of physics never allowed for such a rapid and aggressive star production. Therefore, scientists had to completely recalculate the limits of star formation, rates and thermodynamic equations in the universe. This giant cosmic factory, constantly spewing out stars at an impossible speed, horrified all astrophysicists, and the most terrifying thing in the depths of space was not the violent birth or death of massive stars. The real impossibility was the stubborn sprouting of the seeds of life in a radiation hell where they should never have been found. Webb focused on a very young star system in formation, data missing, light years from Earth. Around this star was a giant disk of dust, rock, and hot gas that would form planets in the future. This region, called a protoplanetary disk, was being bombarded by terrifying ultraviolet radiation from neighboring massive stars. Temperatures suddenly rose to hundreds of degrees, and violent radiation storms burned every atom in their path. But the Webb telescope detected a very special and extremely complex molecule called the methyl Hycean. Right at the center of this deadly ring. This special molecule is the most fundamental building block of all organic life and carbon-based biology on Earth. At the very heart of our planet's tree of life, in our cells, lies this chemical miracle. However, for such a complex organic carbon molecule to exist in that cosmic hell was literally impossible, because the destructive ultraviolet radiation should have shattered those fragile carbon bonds in seconds and completely destroyed the molecule. These delicate building blocks of life could absolutely not have survived inside such a violent cosmic storm. All our chemistry theories stated unequivocally that organic molecules could only be synthesized in protected calm and ice-cold molecular clouds. But this unexpected discovery proved that the deadly radiation, instead of destroying the molecules, was actively accelerating their formation. This meant that life could be born not only in safe havens like Earth, but even in the most violent and deadliest radiation storms of the universe. Our laws of chemistry could never keep up with this violent paradox, but therefore, all astrobiologists on Earth were in complete shock at this impossible methyl Hycean. Those giant gravitational optical lenses that bent space-time and incredibly merged three giant galaxy clusters. Those tens of thousands of wild protostars, born at an impossible speed, brutally violating the laws of physics and tearing apart all the nebula around them. And the delicate cornerstones of life, stubbornly continuing to sprout in the very heart of the universe's most scorching, most deadly radiation storms. These incredible data sent to us by the James Webb Space Telescope, in just a few months, completely destroyed our 100-year-old rules of physics, thermodynamics, optics, and chemistry. Everything needed to be rewritten. But now we ask the biggest and most critical question: how can we see those microscopic carbon molecule bonds from quadrillions of kilometers away? How can we pick out the faint light of young stars behind those massive, thick dust clouds with such perfect clarity? And how does this giant golden telescope, produced by humanity, actually work in the ice-cold darkness of space? That miraculous infrared technology. But how exactly are these impossible images captured? And the system behind those terrifying discoveries that shattered the giant laws of physics. In the second part, we saw the darkest secrets of the universe and the shocking anomalies that brutally destroyed our scientific beliefs. However, now it's time to focus on how these impossible galaxies and invisible complex molecules were technically detected. Because obtaining this incredible data requires a much deeper understanding of thermodynamics and optical engineering than just launching a large lens into space and looking at the sky. Therefore, we must now slow down and delve into the heart of the technical details. You can compare the construction of this telescope's giant optical eye to the perfect assembly of a giant beehive in the vacuum of space. But this beehive must be structurally stronger than steel, yet as light as a feather. At the heart of the Webb telescope are exactly 18 separate mirror segments, each designed in a hexagonal shape. When these independent pieces come together in space, they form a giant 6.5-meter primary focus mirror. The reflective surface is absolutely not made of ordinary glass as in Hubble. The main body of the mirrors is made of pure beryllium, an extremely light and fragile metal. Thanks to this, each mirror segment weighs only 20 kilograms and provides an incredible 92% mass reduction compared to old telescope designs. The bright yellow layer covering the mirrors is microscopically thin gold. Because gold is the element that best resists expansion and contraction in the harsh temperature changes of space. However, the total mass of gold used to cover this entire massive reflective surface is surprisingly only 57 grams. When we look at older generation observation tools, we see single-piece and extremely heavy optical glass mirrors being used. It was physically impossible to fit a material of this size in one piece into the cargo bay of a launch rocket and send it to space. Therefore, engineers designed the mirror as dynamic pieces that could fold onto themselves. Thanks to this incredible design, this $10 billion giant device was folded like a giant origami and fit perfectly into the rocket. And when the device reached its orbit, these beryllium pieces slowly unfolded with millimeter precision, becoming the universe's most powerful light collector. You can compare this device's thermal control system to an ice castle you build right next to a giant house burning bonfire. All the radiant heat from the fire hits you violently. But you stay ice cold under your multi-layered giant umbrella. The Webb telescope must detect very faint thermal waves coming from the most distant stars. Therefore, even the slightest heat leak from its own mechanical motors or electronic circuits can instantly blind its sensitive infrared detectors. To solve this massive heating problem forever, the telescope was placed in a deep orbit at the L2 Lagrange point, exactly 1.5 million kilometers from Earth, to block the destructive heat effects of the Sun and Earth. A giant shield consisting of 5 separate thin layers was stretched over the device's body. Thanks to this perfect insulation armor, the operating temperature on the side of the telescope that always remains in the dark was perfectly reduced to negative 233 degrees Celsius. This temperature is a deadly level, capable of liquefying even nitrogen, our source of life, in seconds. Old space telescopes usually orbited very close to Earth in relatively warm orbits, and because of the constant heat reflected from our planet and the Sun, the sensors could never reach absolute cold. Webb, unlike them, works by isolating itself in the deep freeze of space with its shield. Thanks to this terrible cold, the infrared detectors achieve a completely smooth thermal silence. This perfect machine, not blinded by its own heat, records even the heat of faint stars 13 billion light years away with extraordinary clarity. To simply visualize how the spectroscopy mechanism works, you can think of X-ray machines in hospitals or barcode scanners in supermarkets. You can never see the components inside that packaging tape or product with your eyes. But when that red laser hits the barcode, it instantly shows all the production details on the computer screen. The system works exactly the same way in space. As light travels through the void, it is constantly stretched like a rubber band due to the unstoppable expansion of the universe. That bright visible light from baby galaxies, when it reaches us billions of years later, its wavelength has completely stretched into the infrared spectrum. The state-of-the-art spectrometers on Webb separate these old photons filtered through planetary atmospheres into infinitely small wave ranges. Even a tiny 0.3% absorption of the light power reaching the device definitively proves the presence of methane, water, or carbon dioxide in that gas layer. The detectors separate the photons passing through the 6.5% outer mass that makes up the planetary atmosphere's thickness in milliseconds. Traditional optical telescopes only focused on the light that the human eye could perceive. However, this short wavelength visible light, when it hits the giant cosmic dust clouds in space, is instantly absorbed and the information is completely lost. Infrared waves, on the other hand, are so much wider and longer that they can filter through these thick dust curtains without any obstacle. Therefore, the inside of the giant nebulas, where optical telescopes only saw a dark wall, is no different from transparent glass for Webb. Thanks to this barcode reading technology, we can see the organic carbon molecules hidden behind those violent radiation storms very clearly. We can compare this wonderful astronomical search technique to detecting a small mosquito flying in front of a stadium projector 100 kilometers away in pitch darkness. It is physically impossible to see the mosquito directly with your eyes from that distance. But you can measure the microscopic shadow it creates in the bright light of the lamp with instruments. Giant exoplanets in the universe never produce their own light. They are dark bodies orbiting their stars. Therefore, to find them, giant scanning satellites like TESS, which cost $200 million to build, must come into play. While the TESS satellite is in orbit, it continuously films hundreds of thousands of stars with its 4 giant high-resolution cameras. When a planet passes exactly in front of its own star, it creates a very small but clear dimming in the star's massive brightness. In the world of astronomy, we call this a transit. If the light from a star dims very regularly, every 28 days, or exactly every 33 days, we know that there is a rapidly rotating hidden planet there. In the past, we only used an old gravity measurement method called astrometry to find these invisible planets. We tried to measure the slight wobble of the star caused by the gravity of the planet orbiting it. However, this was an extremely complex formula with a high margin of error. The transit method, known by measuring the light drop with sensors millimeter by millimeter, gives us that planet's size, mass, and orbit with unerring accuracy. Therefore, the $10 billion giant telescope doesn't have to blindly guess where to look in space. TESS detects the targets, JAWS finds the coordinates, and Webb, ACOS, with surgical precision, focuses there to study the atmospheres of the shadows. When we bring all these incredible engineering marvels together, a monumental technological picture emerges. But the limits of our massive space technology and the obstacles we face do not end here. But for this massive mechanical structure to survive in the harsh and icy conditions of space is certainly not just about having a good sun shield. Every part of the telescope must self-repair and align itself perfectly. Millions of kilometers from Earth, without any human intervention. In the first half of the third chapter, we examined how this giant mirror system folds and unfolds. But behind the optical intelligence that prevents the system from going blind in the deep darkness of space lie much more delicate dynamics. Therefore, we now focus on the device's incredible fine-tuning mechanisms. Making 18 separate hexagonal mirrors work as a single eye in space is like conducting a giant symphony orchestra. If a single instrument plays a millisecond late or with a wrong note, that magnificent music is completely ruined. These 18 mirrors in space must also work as a perfect optical choir. However, this physical assembly process is not as easy as it seems. When the mirror segments first open in space, they reflect the faint light from the stars as 18 separate luces, blurry dots. It is at this critical point that the incredible motor system hidden behind Webb comes into play. Behind each lightweight beryllium mirror, there are 7 precise mechanical actuators capable of movements much finer than a human hair. This spring-loaded system gently pushes, pulls, and tilts the 20-kilogram mirrors on their axes, adjusting them with nanometer-scale precision. The activation of the system and the alignment of the mirrors to form a single, clear focal point involves exactly 286 separate mechanical steps. This perfect calibration process continues for weeks, even months, in the negative 233-degree cold of space. If we look at older generation observation tools like the Hubble Space Telescope, we certainly do not see such autonomous technology, because when Hubble was launched in 1990, it was discovered that there was a microscopic manufacturing defect in its single-piece main mirror. All the photos obtained were blurry. Therefore, 3 years later, astronauts had to go to Hubble on a dangerous spacewalk and repair it manually. But since the Webb telescope is 1,500,000 kilometers from Earth, it is not possible for any astronaut to physically reach it. That is why Webb's self-calibrating adaptive optical intelligence is of literally vital importance. The telescope corrects its own errors without any external physical assistance and transforms its gold-plated parts into the universe's sharpest lens, monsters that devour their star's light with insatiable ferocity. However, the telescopes instantly discovered this terrifying cosmic anomaly. Before us stood the massive K2-18b. It was twice as large as Jupiter. But it was not a round planet. its star's terrifying gravity had brutally stretched it into the shape of a giant egg. The biggest record was its mind-boggling darkness. This gas giant was ferociously swallowing 94% of the starlight that fell upon it. Not a single photon was being sent back into space. On the day side, the temperature climbed to 2,500 degrees Celsius for the first time in history, so even the night side was burning at 1,200 degrees Celsius. But the records were never limited to this. Another giant planet named K2-18b pushed everything even further. The surface temperature of this savage hell was a full 4,300 degrees Celsius. This figure was almost equivalent to the burning surface of our own star. For a planet to be as hot as a star was an open challenge to all laws of physics. How could this be possible? When a planet is exposed to such terrible heat, it should have instantly vaporized. Its thick atmosphere should have been swept into the depths of space in seconds. Because the laws of thermodynamics would absolutely not allow this immense heat to hold the gas together. The central gravity could never stop this violent expansion. However, these dark eggs stubbornly continued to exist. These monsters were spewing billions of tons of gas from their atmospheres into space every second. The shock in the scientific community was truly immense, because the clear physical boundary between planets and stars was erased forever, and astrophysicists had to urgently recalculate the absolute melting points of planets: massive, limitless, and terrifyingly large. Planetary rings should never exceed a certain physical limit. But J1407b took the stage with a colossal structure that would put our entire solar system to shame. It was the largest, widest, and most impossible planet in space. Immediately recall Saturn's famous and captivating rings. Now, magnify those thin rings exactly 640 times. This system possessed such incredible dimensions that it shattered all records. If J1407b were to take Saturn's place in our solar system, its terrifying rings would appear much larger than the full moon in Earth's sky. This was the largest planetary ring system ever observed. Its total width shamelessly exceeded 120 million kilometers, and the total mass of the cosmic dust rotating within its giant disks was almost equal to the mass of Earth. But how could such a terrifying ring remain intact without disintegrating? Because the planet's central gravity could not hold those ices together millions of kilometers away. According to the laws of gravity, those outer rings should have been flung into the void of space long ago, or they were bound to collapse in a deadly spiral towards the center. This massive orbital balance was theoretically impossible. However, the planet was miraculously spinning this massive debris pile around it. Scientists were stunned when they saw the huge black gaps within those giant rings. Because those large dark gaps were evidence of the birth of massive moons. Newly forming moons were rapidly clearing that terrifying cosmic debris. A historic earthquake occurred in the world of astronomy. The models of planet and moon formation in the universe were left completely helpless. This giant disk, for the first time in history, allowed us to witness the savage birth of planets on such a terrifying scale. Alone, rogue, and incredibly deadly. Here is a planet without a star that should have frozen and died in space. But this giant rogue planet, drifting in the black void, terrified everyone. It was not in the orbit of any giant star. However, right in the heart of darkness, it was glowing with fire, all by itself. This massive body before us was exactly 12 times heavier than Jupiter. Its equatorial diameter was 1.2 times larger than the biggest in our system. But the most shocking record was its mind-boggling magnetic power. This rogue planet's magnetic field was exactly 4 million times stronger than Earth's shield. This was the most terrifying magnetic energy storm ever measured in the history of the universe. Due to this massive power, terrifying auroras were erupting from the planet's poles. So, how was this physically possible? Because these giant auroras could only be created by the giant solar winds of a star. A celestial body without its own sun could never create this glow in space. It had absolutely no fuel. The energy bombardment from outside was zero. But this lonely giant was miraculously producing its own light in its own darkness. Therefore, all our theories about magnetism collapsed instantly. The true source of this power had to be a brand new mechanism hidden within it. Or, invisible moons were brutally triggering this power through massive friction. The scientific world was completely stunned by this great discovery. The belief that starless rogue planets were just dead pieces of rock was destroyed forever. They were giant nuclear monsters that produced their own energy. Death, savage, cosmic, and a moment of giant death. We always believed that the destruction of stars was a slow process spread over millions of years. But Webb witnessed the seconds of this terrifying end live. The giant star, UR124, was caught by that golden lens. This giant star had completely finished its old age. It was standing on the very brink of that massive nuclear explosion. Before us was a giant ticking time bomb, about to turn into a supernova. The biggest record lay in the incredible amount of mass the star was ejecting into space. The star was spewing its outer layers around it at thousands of kilometers per second. Such a massive dust cloud formed that even light barely escaped from that thick debris. This massive envelope ejection process was the fastest act of matter ejection ever observed in the history of the universe. How could this be possible? How could a star eject such a massive part of its mass and still remain in one piece? Why couldn't the central gravity stop this violent nuclear expansion? But normally, when the outer layers are ejected, the center should have instantly collapsed upon itself, because the star should have violently exploded in milliseconds. However, the giant WR124 seemed frozen on that thin line of death. Therefore, the known models of stellar deaths were profoundly shaken. The scientific world was literally mesmerized by this massive monument of death. How supernovas seeded the universe with heavy elements was seen with such clarity for the first time in history. The infrared radiation gushing from that giant death cloud heralded the birth of new planets. Cosmic destruction and creation were locked in the same savage second. We saw those 24 giant ocean worlds, far more perfect than Earth. We found those dark planets that completely absorb light and burn at 4,000 degrees. We witnessed those giant and impossible rings of 120 million kilometers. We discovered those lonely magnetic rogues that shine with 4 million times more power in the starless dark. And we watched live the savage stellar deaths that engulfed the universe in a giant dust cloud. Webb and all our giant space technology thus brutally destroyed the limits of the universe. Every new giant number recorded was actually the death warrant for an old law we believed in. As humanity, we painfully understood how great our cosmic ignorance was. But there is more, something much bigger and philosophically much more terrifying. So, what do all these broken records and all these dark, impossible discoveries mean for our place in the universe? If all our massive laws of physics have collapsed, and if these massive laws of physics have collapsed, as humanity, we have painfully understood how great our cosmic ignorance is. But there is more, something much bigger and philosophically much more terrifying. What do all these broken records and all these dark, impossible discoveries mean for our place in the universe? Because, as the scientific world buckled under the weight of this profound question, the brand new data packets sent by Webb continued to mercilessly tear apart the last valid laws of physics we had left. The fabric of space was literally being torn apart. And now, the real proof was coming. The peak of the peak. The fabric of space was tearing. Literally. Webb recorded the most violent and most massive collision in the universe, Roig, second by second. Pandora's cluster. In this chaotic region, 3 giant galaxy clusters, which should normally be hundreds of millions of light years apart, were colliding with each other. This was not a record. This was history itself. Thousands of billions of stars. Massive black holes and dense dark matter. These 3 colossal structures were brutally merging to create a single megacluster. This enormous mass was so heavy and so dense that it bent the fabric of space-time like a giant cosmic magnifying glass, gravitational lensing. But this was unlike anything we had ever seen before. Thanks to this natural lens of trillions of tons created by the collision, Webb saw faint galaxies from the early universe, which it could normally never see. 10 times brighter, wider, and larger. This was the universe's most powerful natural telescope. The gathering of such an incredibly large mass and its ability to bend space into such a perfect optical lens was something that absolutely should not have happened. Because, for dark matter and normal matter to create such a symmetrical magnifying glass seemed almost impossible according to our physical models. Light should have traveled in a straight line through space. However, here, it was being refracted and bent at an incredible angle, creating a massive cosmic illusion. The most fundamental optical laws of the universe were literally collapsing. Astronomers could not believe their eyes when they saw more than 1,000 new stars we were unaware of, filtering through this giant gravitational lens. No, because this colossal image proved the terrifying dominance of gravity over light with a clarity never before seen in human history. All optical theories knelt before this massive, natural anomaly. But before this optical shockwave had passed, a much more violent rebellion was discovered in the dark nursery of stars. A rebellion, an uprising, a savage battlefield. The telescope observing the Tarantula Nebula did not expect to see a calm, cold gas cloud slowly condensing. Because before it was the universe's most savage delivery room. This giant nebula, located exactly 170,000 light-years from Earth, was an incredible 1,800 light-years wide. This structure was the most violent, largest, and most active star-forming region among all the neighboring galaxies of the Milky Way. A series of records when Webb's infrared cameras pierced through this thick cosmic dust curtain. It found about 30,000 young protostars previously hidden from our telescopes. 30,000 in a single frame. These stars had not yet reached their full mass and were wildly growing. Greedy cosmic monsters. They were sucking in the cold gas around them like a giant vacuum cleaner. for tens of thousands of massive stars to be born simultaneously in such a narrow space and in such a short time was completely contrary to our theories. Because, under normal conditions, star formation should be a slow, balanced, chaos and isolated process lasting millions of years. The hydrogen gas should have slowly collapsed under gravity. But here, stars were emerging at an extremely chaotic speed, like a chain nuclear explosion. This was impossible. The laws of physics never allowed for such a rapid and aggressive star production. Therefore, scientists had to completely recalculate the limits of star formation rates and thermodynamic equations in the universe. This giant cosmic factory, constantly spewing out stars at an impossible speed, horrified all astrophysicists. Everything we believed in was melting away in the flames of this star factory. And the most terrifying thing in the depths of space was not the violent birth or death of massive stars. The real impossibility was the stubborn sprouting of the seeds of life in a radiation hell where they should never have been found. This was the moment it all ended. Webb focused on a very young star system. Around this star was a giant disk of dust, rock, and hot gas that would form planets in the future in a protoplanetary disk. But this was not a cradle. This was a hell. This region was being bombarded by terrifying ultraviolet radiation from neighboring massive stars. Temperatures suddenly rose to hundreds of degrees, and violent radiation storms burned every atom in their path. Life could not exist here. But the Webb telescope detected a very special and extremely complex molecule called the methyl Hycean. Right at the center of this deadly ring, CH3+. This special molecule is the most fundamental building block of all organic life and carbon-based biology on Earth. At the very heart of our planet's tree of life, in our cells, lies this chemical miracle. However, for such a complex organic carbon molecule to exist in that cosmic hell was literally impossible, because, the destructive ultraviolet radiation should have shattered those fragile carbon bonds in seconds and completely destroyed the molecule. These delicate building blocks of life could absolutely not have survived inside such a violent cosmic storm. All our chemistry theories stated unequivocally that organic molecules could only be synthesized in protected, calm, and ice-cold molecular clouds. But this unexpected discovery proved that the deadly radiation, instead of destroying the molecules, was actively accelerating their formation. This was the point where reason stopped. This meant that life could be born not only in safe havens like Earth, but even in the most violent and deadliest radiation storms of the universe. Our laws of chemistry could never keep up with this violent paradox. Therefore, all astrobiologists on Earth were in complete shock at this impossible methyl Hycean. This was not just a discovery, it was a declaration that the most fundamental rules of existence needed to be rewritten. Those giant gravitational optical lenses that bent space-time and incredibly merged three giant galaxy clusters. Those tens of thousands of wild protostars must have born at an impossible speed, brutally violating the laws of physics and tearing apart all the nebula around them, and the delicate cornerstones of life, stubbornly continuing to sprout in the very heart of the universe's most scorching, most deadly radiation storms. These incredible data sent to us by the James Webb Space Telescope completely destroyed our 100-year-old rules of physics, thermodynamics, optics, and chemistry, and everything needed to be rewritten: speed, shock, destruction, and rebirth. We witnessed the deepest secrets of the universe. But now it is time to stop, time to take a deep breath, and time to think. All these broken records, all these impossible discoveries, all the torn theories, and all the rewritten equations. So, what does all this mean for us, for humanity? What does it mean for our place on this vast, indifferent, and savage stage of the universe? Because the greatest discoveries begin not in the lenses of the telescope, but in the soul behind the eyes that look into those lenses. And now we embark on that journey, transcending the limits of physics into the deep waters of philosophy. And now, in the face of all these broken records, all the torn theories, all the shattered laws of physics, we stop and ask ourselves, so, what does all this mean for us? Speed, shock, destruction. In the midst of this cosmic hurricane, what is our stance as humanity? But now it is time to stop, to slowly slip away from that maximum speed, and take a deep breath, and time to think. Because the greatest discoveries begin not in the $10 billion lenses of the telescope, but in the soul behind the eyes that look into those lenses. What is our place as humanity on this vast, indifferent, zaltz, and savage stage of the universe? We now confront those great truths whispered in this silent, just infinite void. Let's start with the first great paradox. The paradox of knowledge and ignorance. And on one hand, stands the greatest triumph of humanity's collective intellect, a $10 billion, gold-plated eye, an engineering marvel that operates in the freezing cold of space at -233 degrees Celsius, capable of looking 13 billion years into the past, able to detect even a 0.3% chemical change in the atmosphere of a planet quadrillions of kilometers away. With this massive technology, we thought we had parted the curtain on the darkest secrets of the universe. We saw galaxies at the dawn of time. We found the chemical signature of life. We broke the laws of physics. This seems like an absolute victory for the human mind. But, on the other hand, there is an ocean of ignorance that deepens with every new image, with every new data packet, and every answer gives birth to 10 new, bigger, and more terrifying questions. We learned that the universe matured much earlier than we thought. But how? We understood that life can sprout even in radiation. Hells, but why? We saw that our laws of physics are incomplete. But what are the real laws? This is a terrifying truth, because all this knowledge we possess is like a tiny candlelight we hold in an infinite dark corridor. The light illuminates the few meters just ahead of us, but it also shows us just how infinite, how bottomless, and how dark that corridor is. That moment when we realize that everything we thought we knew is nothing compared to what we don't know is a tragic moment, but because this is the moment we understand the limits of our minds, the helplessness of our species, and that we can never reach that absolute, final knowledge. But perhaps this is not the real miracle. Perhaps the meaning of being human is not to find the answers, but to dare to ask those questions. Perhaps what makes us who we are is our determination to keep walking down that endless corridor, with that flickering candlelight in our hands, in spite of fear. It is our persistence in setting out with our small boats, instead of giving up in the face of the ocean's vastness. You too, at some point in your life, have asked those big questions. Why am I here? What is the meaning of all this? And maybe you never found the answers. But the very act of asking those questions made you a part of that grand cosmic quest. It made you a partner to the soul of that telescope. Peering 13 billion years into the past, because you too, just like that telescope, are a consciousness looking into the darkness, searching for the light. And now we come to the second, more personal paradox, the paradox of time. On one hand, there is an unimaginable cosmic history of 13.8 billion years, red dwarf stars that will continue to shine for another 45 billion years, giant galaxies that took tens of billions of years to form. This timescale before us is far beyond the grasp of the human mind. Think for a moment. If we were to count every second the universe has existed as a grain of sand, all the beaches on Earth would not be enough to represent that number. On the other hand, there is you. There is us, an average lifespan of 80 to 90 years. As short as a heartbeat, gone in the blink of an eye. In this massive cosmic calendar, our existence is not even a speck of dust on a grain of sand, a millisecond flicker. This is a heartbreakingly tragic fact, because we only see a single frame, a fleeting moment, of that magnificent cosmic film. We saw those stars being born, but we will not witness their deaths. We watched how those giant galaxies collided, but we will never know their final state billions of years from now. This is a sorrow of mortality, a sadness of transience. It is the deep melancholy of standing at the gate of eternity, knowing you can never enter. But isn't it this very transience that makes the moment precious? If we had an eternal life, would we appreciate the value of a single sunset, a single moment? Perhaps this fleeting existence is a grace. Because during this brief moment, the universe is looking at itself with eyes of its own creation. After 13.8 billion years of silence, we, made of stardust, stand up and look at those stars and say, "How beautiful you are." In that moment, during that brief human life, the universe gains consciousness. The universe becomes aware of itself. Your existence is not a wasted moment in this vast ocean of time. It is the most precious moment, when the universe experiences itself, feels itself, and gives meaning to itself. You may be just one frame of that film. But without that frame, the film itself would be meaningless, because a show with no audience has never existed, but you are both the actor and the audience of the universe. This brings us to the third and perhaps most poignant paradox, the paradox of loneliness and connection. When we look through the eyes of the telescope, what do we see? An immense void. Islands of galaxies suspended hundreds of millions of light years from each other. That rogue planet with a magnetic field 4 million times stronger, shining alone in the dark without a star of its own. And that ocean world, 2-18b, 124 light years away, perhaps alive but forever unreachable. This view instills a deep sense of cosmic loneliness that permeates the human soul. We are a lonely species, trapped on a pale blue dot in this vast, cold, and indifferent void. The distances between us are so absolute, so ruthless, that it would take us tens of thousands of years to reach even the nearest neighboring star. This is a tragic isolation. We feel as if there is a glass wall between us and the rest of the universe that we can never break through. We are alone. But that loneliness is an illusion, because the same science also tells us this. We are not separate from the universe. We are a part of the universe, and in the deepest, most intimate way. The iron atoms flowing in the blood in your veins were not created on this planet where you were born. They were forged in the heart of a giant star far away from us billions of years ago, and scattered into space when that star exploded as a supernova. The calcium in your bones, the sodium in your nerve cells, the carbon in your DNA, all are the legacy of that stardust. The distant stars you see when you look at the night sky are your ancestors. You are the rearranged Ishpo, standing, Sha, thinking, and feeling form of that stardust. This is the deepest, most unbreakable bond in the universe. We may be physically alone, but chemically, existentially, we are all one. You are not something separate from the universe. You are the universe itself. That's why when you look at the night sky, you are not looking at a stranger, but at your own origin, your own home. This feeling of loneliness is actually a kind of amnesia. We feel lonely because we have forgotten who we are, where we come from. But every single galaxy, every single star that Webb shows us, is actually reminding us of our own essence. The staggering truth that knowledge begets ignorance, the tragic beauty of our fleeting existence against the infinity of time, and the unbreakable bond that lies behind our cosmic loneliness. All these deep and contradictory thoughts push us towards a more fundamental inquiry into what it means to be human. But within this inquiry lies also a responsibility that comes with discovery, not just to think, but also to choose. And therefore, all these deep and contradictory thoughts, the staggering truth that knowledge begets ignorance, the tragic beauty of our fleeting existence against the infinity of time, and the unbreakable bond that lies behind our cosmic loneliness. They now bring us to a crossroads where we are forced not just to think, but also to choose, with this immense responsibility that comes with discovery. We as humanity face one of our most fundamental questions. Will we go forward, or will we turn back and hold on tighter to what we have? This is not just a scientific question. This is a question of the soul. And now, after learning all these massive truths, after seeing these ruthless laws of the universe, those bone-melting gravities, those bottomless ammonia oceans with no landmass on them, and those endless red skies, I now want you to turn to yourself and in this deep silence, ask yourself a very honest question. Do you really want to go to those planets? Wandering alone and adrift, without the light of any star? To start everything from scratch? To struggle with terrifying technological challenges and be a cosmic refugee in the darkness? Oh, Hycean, after seeing with telescopes how vast, how terrifying, and how ruthless a radiation hell the universe is. Do you think how horrific and nightmarish it would be to abandon the perfect comfort that Earth offers, with its flowing water and breathable air laid out like a home, and go to barren deserts like Mars? Do you choose to cling to our small, fragile blue home with much more strength, much more gratitude, and much more love? Is what excites you the most the dream of being a brave space conqueror among those giant galaxies? Or is it the fact that the perfect, wild, delicate, style, and fragile balance of Earth is actually such an exceptional miracle among these billions of planets that makes your heart tremble the most? In fact, both of these complex opposing and deep feelings currently warring in your mind are extremely valid, extremely human, and extremely meaningful. Because, on one hand, we are brave, intelligent, and insatiable explorers who want to conquer the dark unknown, expand our horizons. and touch the stars. But, and on the other hand, we are also those fragile, emotional, and homesick evolutionary children who are just looking for the familiar atmosphere, the warm seas, and the safe sky of our own home, afraid of getting lost in the infinite darkness. And this internal conflict brings us to the greatest philosophical discovery: the paradox of the mirror. All these massive space figures, the impossible astrophysical records shattered by our telescopes, the terrifying discoveries of the infrared spectrometers, and the deep philosophical contrasts we debate within ourselves, are now giving us a very important, very clear, and unshakable existential message. We now know for certain that every new faint beam of light captured by our $10 billion giant telescopes in the ice-cold and bottomless darkness of space is not just a mirror pointed at the sky, but a giant philosophical mirror turned directly into our own inner selves, into the soul of our own species. This is the most unexpected, most staggering truth. We built a device to look 13 billion years away. But that device showed us our own 13.8 billion year past and our current fragility. There is a tragic face to what this mirror reflects. Because James Webb's lightweight Hycean's gold-plated mirrors do not just reflect old galaxies 13 billion light-years away or deadly sandstorms. They also perfectly reflect our infinite cosmic loneliness and biological fragility in the face of thousands of billions of stars. In that mirror, we see how small, how temporary, and how vulnerable we are. This is a sorrow that seeps into the human soul. But the same mirror also shows us a magnificent truth, because it also reflects our endless search for meaning, our unbreakable curiosity, and the audacious spirit that defines our species. Yes, we are small. But this small being dares to understand the universe. Yes, we are lonely. But this lonely being continues to sing its own song into that void, and you too are looking into that mirror. Every challenge in your life, every question, every search for meaning, is a part of the reflection in that cosmic mirror. You are the eyes through which the universe looks at itself, and what you see in that mirror is not just stars, but the deepest layers of your own soul. As this physical, technical, and massive journey, filled with huge discoveries, comes to an end, towards this dark void of space, slowly and calmly, after all this complex data we have collected, from the physical laws we thought were immutable and have shattered, and from the impossible molecules we found in the atmospheres of those wild planets, we now begin to look at the stars with a much different, much more mature, and much deeper philosophical perspective. The storm is slowly subsiding, and only one absolute truth remains. With this brand new technical and philosophical perspective we have gained in the face of the vastness of the silent, cold, and infinitely ruthless universe, how will we return to our own world at the very end of the story? When we lift our heads at night and look at that inky black sky, among the countless shining foreign stars, where exactly will we find our true home and our ultimate place? Because in this video, we discovered the depths of the universe, the broken laws of physics, and those giant planets. But I have not yet revealed the real great secret to you. All this massive chaos we have seen is actually a tiny remnant of the first second of existence. So, how did the universe expand at an incredible rate of billions of trillions of times in a millisecond? In our next journey, we will descend into the dark secret of cosmic inflation. Are you ready? In this video, we witnessed the birth of the universe and impossible discoveries. But I didn't tell you the biggest secret. Every beginning has an end. How will the universe die? By freezing? By ripping apart? Or by collapsing on itself? In our next journey, we are going to the ultimate fate of the universe, the Big Freeze and the Big Rip. Are you ready?